see here. Just making sure the stream is live. Good. Okay. Good evening. It is Wednesday, which means that it is the time of the week when I take 10 minutes to answer your questions and address a few things, either related to last week's lecture or the one coming up on Sunday. We have two questions today. One might take a little bit longer than 10 minutes to address. We'll see how it goes. I found myself doing extra research, which I have sworn off doing for these just to keep them short, and so I stopped myself. We'll see how it goes. So I will put 10 minutes on the clock, and we will proceed from there. Let's go. The first question is about Epistle to Diognetus, chapter 11, which talks about the logos, the Greek term for word, also seen in John 1, the word became flesh. What do you make of this being the only identification used? I believe it's referring to identification for Jesus. And what early Christians would have understood this word to mean? The answer to this is, I think, fairly simple. By this time, John's use of the logos concept, he's kind of combining different aspects of Jewish philosophy, a la Philo of Alexandria, but also some elements of Greek philosophy as well. By this time, the Gospel of John would have sort of disseminated that idea throughout the Christian communities. So it is not, I think, odd at all to find that idea cropping up here. It is a little bit odd to find it cropping up in the Epistle to Diognetus, because Diognetus is not a Christian. And so we might ask, why is the author of this epistle using such a loaded term to discuss Christianity with a non-Christian? The answer to that is that the authenticity of these last two chapters of Epistle to Diognetus is disputed. That is, chapters 11 and 12 could very well be a later addition that is not a part of the original letter, in which case it actually makes sense to have an increase in sort of specific Christian vocabulary there at the end. However, if those two chapters are original, then it could be that the author of the epistle is expecting the reader, Diognetus, to be persuaded and become more and more interested in the Christian faith. And so it might make sense rhetorically to start using more and more specific Christian vocabulary to reflect that sort of process of persuasion. We already know that Diognetus seems to be interested in the Christian faith and familiar with, at some level, Christianity and Jewish practice as well. So all of that kind of hangs together, I think. It isn't that odd. It kind of makes sense given where we are chronologically, where we are in the development of early Christology. Second question, asking about my thoughts on the role and state of apologetics in the church today, which kind of connects with the Epistle to Diognetus, which definitely has like an apologetic bent to it. It is in some ways literally an explanation of the Christian faith and practice. I'm going to just sort of, I guess, outline some of my concerns about mostly presuppositional apologetics, because that is what I come into contact most of the time in sort of the Reformed world, and just kind of some of my concerns from the perspective of a New Testament scholar. So presuppositional apologetics, there's a lot I could say about it, but it's kind of based on three main planks, I would say. Presupposing the core tenets of the Christian faith, presupposing a Christian worldview, arguing for the coherency of that worldview, and arguing, or at least pointing to flaws in other worldviews that are set up against Christianity. And there tends to be an issue here, and this is where I guess I sort of have a problem as a New Testament scholar, is that if you assume a conclusion and then go out and find data to support that conclusion, that is not good scholarship. And so a lot of the time when I am, watching a debate, which I don't do very, very often, with an apologist or something, but, if I am sort of listening to that sort of thing, I find that a lot of times apologists, and I'm generalizing here, but a lot of times apologists end up misusing and misrepresenting historical data at best, and at worst saying things that are just not at all accurate. I am a New Testament scholar, and so I don't really appreciate it or like it when apologists misrepresent the information that we have about the manuscripts that form the basis of the New Testament texts. I don't appreciate it when apologists try to sort of inappropriately harmonize the Gospels to sort of build a supposedly ironclad case for historical reliability, however they're conceiving of that, or overstating the arguments for early datings of the Gospels or whatever, to try to contribute to an apologetical argument. I don't appreciate that. So that as somebody who is sort of responsible for looking at that data and reading it in an intellectually honest way, that kind of bothers me, because that sort of thing does happen. And so if you're a layperson and you're wanting to sort of get a handle on some of those trickier aspects of the Christian faith, like text criticism or, the historical authenticity of the Gospels or things like that, I would not engage. I wouldn't just engage with apologetics, right? Find some other sources, because the chances are, at least it's possible that apologists are not necessarily handling their sources correctly. Not always true, but it's possible. And also, presuppositional apologetics, I find, tends to be based on a certain type of epistemological certainty. That is, I have built up my Christian worldview on, the foundation of Christianity and my presuppositions, and I know for certain it's true. I have epistemological certainty. And you have built up your worldview on your presuppositions, and now I can sort of fire my catapult of argument from the ramparts of my worldview and try to demolish yours. That is, at least in practice, I think, what a lot of presuppositional argumentation tends to look like. And it ends up being like this sort of game of battleship. And in this scenario, I think the temptation is great to use argumentatively expedient weapons. That is, to grasp for data that is expedient to your argument and maybe not so intellectually honest. Does it matter if I'm using my sources correctly as long as those sources help me take down someone's argument? Sometimes it doesn't appear to be very important. That doesn't appear to matter. And I also find that there isn't a great explanation for what happens when arguments are made against the Christian worldview. Oh, my light just turned off. Successfully. What happens when someone else is able to sort of poke holes in my worldview and they make a good case? Does that completely shatter my sort of construct? And I think the data that we're presented with in scripture and in history as well is a little bit more complex. Our only choices aren't that, for example, the Gospels are either completely historically reliable and accurate, or they're complete fiction. If we sort of frame the conversation that way, then we're sort of setting ourselves up for, I don't know, a problematic situation where our legs are cut out from under us, and the whole sort of argument falls down around us. I tend to, I think, gravitate towards the approach of Leslie Newbigin, who was primarily a missionary. And so his foundation isn't really epistemological certainty. And I would argue that we can't really have epistemological certainty anyways. But Newbigin argues for proceeding with confidence as opposed to certainty in light of God's revelation and the evidence that we see in the world. And so for Newbegin, the beliefs that are acceptable within a given culture or subculture are largely either acceptable or not based on plausibility structures. And he defines a plausibility structure as patterns of belief and practice accepted within a given society, which determine which beliefs are plausible to its members and which are not. And I think it's generally true that Christianity has largely lost plausibility in post-Christian societies. And I think this has much less to do with belief or non-belief in certain sets of propositions, and it has much more to do with the larger cultural plausibility structures that form and shape cultures and societies. And so in a lot of ways, I think it doesn't necessarily matter whether your presuppositions are coherent and whether you can argue for them cogently. Much of Christian ethics, I think, can be rejected simply because it doesn't fit within a culture's plausibility structure. And so it's less about what people believe, the planks of their worldview, the bricks that they've used to build up that worldview. And it's more about the cultural forces that bring about the why of those beliefs. Why do people believe what they believe? And so my timer has gone off, and so I won't sort of go too much more into that. But all that to say, I still find value in classical apologetic approaches for theological purposes and perhaps more academic conversations. But when it comes to sort of what I am concerned about when it comes to apologetics and when it comes to how, in my mind, we should live out 1 Peter 3:15, always being ready to provide a reason for the hope that is in us, I am much more, I guess, in line with Newbegin than I am with sort of a presuppositionalist approach. So that for me is kind of where I sit in terms of apologetics. I just mostly want people to use their sources well, to use their data in an intellectually honest way, and to live Christ-like lives that are in and of themselves apologetics for the truth of the Christian faith. And does that living out of a missional sort of personal relational apologetic intersect with New Testament scholarship? You bet it does. I'm not trying to sort of dissect those two things and drive a wedge between them. But that's at least where my personal focus lies. So I hope that was helpful. And again, I think I've made a reasonable number of generalizations in the last 7 minutes. I accept that. But that's just a general description of my perspective. I highly recommend reading Leslie Newbegin's The Gospel in a Pluralist Society, as well as his Proper Confidence. I think both of those books do a fantastic job of outlining how we as creatures can be confident in God's revelation in a world in which we aren't sort of epistemologically supreme, if that makes sense. But I would recommend both of those books very highly. Okay. Having said all that, I will see you on Sunday, 3 p.m. for our next lecture, where we will be covering the Epistle to Diognetus, objections raised against Christianity in the context of the Roman Empire, but also the legal realities behind persecution and what Christians actually had to face on a day-to-day level in terms of opposition to their movement. So that'll be Sunday. I'll see you all then. Peace be with you.